Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about failing and starting again. And we're going to frame it by this portrait that I've created in my sketchbook, devoted only to human portraits, which I've been keeping for quite a number of years now. There's something about portraiture that I find so meditative. It's like coming back to the breath, as you do in yoga and in meditation, where you notice that your mind has drifted and you bring yourself gently back to focusing on just the feelings and sensations of you breathing in and out. And for me, I find that when I'm painting portraits, I really can't explain it. It's not perhaps my most favourite thing in the world to create, although I do enjoy it. I love illustrating animals in a cute and playful fashion. But there's something really soulful and meaningful about portraiture that keeps pulling me back time and time again. I think I started this sketchbook about 5 years ago. It's a heavyweight Stillman and Burn one. I'll have to find out which it is and pop that in the description box for you because I can't remember offhand. It is quite smooth paper. It's white and 270 GSM, but I can't remember what the name of the book is. Now, you will have noticed that before I started painting today, there was already a background on my page. And the reason for that is I previously started this and really disliked the way I was going with the portrait. I've got the scale slightly different. If you look closely at the beginning, you may be able to see the outlines of the figure. But rather than continuing and pushing through it, I wasn't enjoying my practice. It wasn't feeling in any way soothing or meaningful. So I just slapped down a load of water, added some watercolor splashes, and actually I think I grabbed some Neocolor 2 in russet to put down this warm kind of burnt sienna tone to the page. And when I'd done that, I simply pushed the sketchbook to one side, got up and went about my day and didn't think about it any further. Today, however, I wanted to come back to that practice. I've been thinking about the reference image. I collect a load of them from places like Pexels, Pixabay, Unsplash, and save them on my Google Drive so that I've got a ready stash of portraits to give me reference whenever I need it, and I don't have to waste time searching for it when I'm really in the mood to get into the zone with a portrait. I pick the images mostly on instinct, looking for dramatic lighting, interesting poses or different angles to the head or face. Look for different genders, different sexes, different races, just to keep practicing and challenging myself to different types of people. I'm using gouache because I'd already added that colour down to the page with watercolour and neocolour previously. So I wanted something that had a bit more body, but not as opaque as an acrylic paint. So we are using predominantly Quin Magenta, Delft Blue and Burnt Umber as my very limited palette, and later on we will add in some perhaps surprising colours, but we'll come on to them in a minute. I was working with the colours that I already had on my page, and I wanted to enhance them further and kind of pull the portrait out of the page, rather than be quite formulaic about it and work out precise ratios of if a face is this wide, then the eye must be this wide. If the angle of the chin is this, the angle of the nose must be that. Instead, to try and make it less complicated, I like to pick a limited palette and then to try and switch my brain off thinking about the image as a person, which sounds a bit inhuman as I'm saying it out loud. However, bear with me, it does work. When you can look at a reference, and this applies whether it's a plant or a person or an animal or an item of food, whatever it is, and you can convert what you're saying into shape, line, form, tone, and not be too wedded to the idea of what a nose, in inverted commas, should look like or a skin tone should be made up of. You need to just see what you see And that is the hard bit in art. It's not this part where you're slapping colour down on a page. The hard part is the very first part, which is just such a metaphor for life, isn't it? But it's the seeing things for what they are. And once you get your eye in and you practice really looking, and you look more at your subject than you do at your page, you'll find that really interesting things start to happen, and that your perspective shifts and the art that you create shifts with it. I think that's why I come back to portraiture so much. It's because faces are things that we are confronted with every single day of our lives, and we, in inverted commas, know what a face should look like. However, how often have you stopped and just observed and saw what was in front of you for what it is, and not put your preconceived perceptions upon it? For example, if I think of plants or flowers, which are subjects that I find really challenging to draw and require a lot of concentration, with a face, because I've spent so much of my life looking at faces, I kind of have an idea already of how they are made up, the angles and the shapes that typically make up the human face. And I don't really have to think about it because it's become second nature to me. So I've got all of that sort of preconceived knowledge in the back of my mind. And when I'm looking at the person, I'm looking for interesting things like where the darkest darks are, shapes the shadows make, angles of things that create interesting compositions. Whereas if I was painting a plant, then I would struggle with the composition and the positioning of leaves and petals, for example, because I would really have to think about it. And while I'm thinking so hard about the curve of a rose petal, for example, I would be looking at my fingers, watching where I put my lines or my paint, and not really looking at the rose to see the shape of the petal in the real world before my own eyes. The problem with that is when you're not looking at your subject, you can quickly go off-piste and find that you've really radically changed the scale of the image you're trying to create, or you've made some decisions that really don't describe what you're observing in front of you. And it can be difficult to come back from that. And that brings us full circle back to where we started, actually. I felt that I was getting into that place the first time I sat down to paint this portrait. I hadn't really spent enough time looking at the reference photograph to familiarize myself with it before I sat down. So I found that everything was really quite forced as I concentrated really hard about getting the angulation of her face right and the positioning of her eyes to her ears to her nose. Today, when I came back to my practice, the only thing that I knew I wanted was to work with gouache because of its opacity, meaning that it would layer on top of that background I had and cover up the parts that I wasn't so keen on from the first time round. Now, there's nothing to say that you have to do this. There's no laws in art that say if you are not finding your pieces going in the direction that you want it to, that you must continue and keep on going until it works. We can turn the page, we can throw it away, we can paint over it and start again, or we can just abandon it entirely and forget all about it. And I think the importance here is you do what feels right for you. For me, I knew that this image was something that I wanted to capture in my sketchbook. I found the face really beautiful. I loved the colours of her skin tone. And whilst I've certainly not gone for realistic colours with the mix of gouache paints that I've chosen, primarily Quin Magenta, Delft Blue and Burnt Umber, they are reflective of the photographic image that I'm working from in the first place. Which brings me back to the initial point I opened this video with about how you can fail and start again and what that means for us in our art practice. Now, for me, I drove myself crazy trying to produce photorealistic effects, both in portraiture and landscapes and other subjects. I would spend hours trying to mix the precise colours that I was seeing with my own eyes and make the scale absolutely perfect. And for me, I just didn't find a lot of joy with that. It was just a frustrating, disappointing process. And I came away feeling like my skills weren't that good and that I was never going to get that good because the hours of work I was putting in weren't getting the results which were making me happy. So recently, I have switched my focus away from that. I'm deliberately not trying to replicate exact colours or exact images anymore. I want to make my art more expressive, looser, and playful. I'd like my art practice to be an opportunity to play with the beautiful colours I have in my art supplies and to explore what happens when I change them from what I'm looking at. I don't want to be bound to a reference image as if the only acceptable outcome is to produce a photocopy of the thing in front of me. Taking that pressure of expectation off my shoulders has made an enormous difference to the satisfaction I get from my art practice. I speak about my art as a practice rather than a finished product because it's something that I want to come back to every single day for as long as I can each day. And I want it to be a positive space where I can enter creative flow, where you almost become one with your materials and it's difficult to disentangle you from the art that you're creating. It's a way that I escape the demons in my head from mental illness. My art practice is as much a part of my treatment as any medication or therapy has ever been. And I wanted to continue in that way. Why should I punish myself trying to expect results that are outside of my reach and actually in a place that I don't really want to go? Don't really want to reside in photorealistic art. I want to live in more playful, expressive, experimental art instead. So loosening those shackles and coming back to the most simple form of art where you take yourself a limited palette and start to play has really done wonderful things for my outlook on when I sit down to practice. I'm not really thinking about whether a piece has failed or not. Yes, I do dislike some of them. And sometimes I think to myself, oh God, what have I done here? This is terrible. But I can quite quickly turn it around and look at the rest of the blank pages and think, well, I've got plenty of other opportunities to have another go if I choose to on another day and just see where that practice takes me. As I got towards the end of this portrait, which took about 40 minutes in real time to put together, I started feeling like I needed some light tones. And to help me do that, I pulled out some supplies that I don't use very often and you probably won't see people using in more traditional or inverted commas fine art practices, and they are some metallic gouache by the brand Shinhan. I have 4 of their colours: silver, pearl gold, rich gold and pearl copper, and I use 3 of them in this portrait. And whilst they are quite difficult to get a good image of either on camera or in a photo, in real life they're really beautiful and really helpful in reflecting backlight and really showing off those lightest tones and the highlighted areas, like along the bridge of her nose, the upper eyelid, the philtrum, which is the bit between your nose and your top lip. And I really love using them, and they're not something that I reach for very often. The paint is a little bit pernickety as it is very prone to separate from its binder, and as I don't use them every day, I tend to forget and then have to squeeze out a bit before realising that there's a puddle of binder and very little pigment on my palette. And instead I go back with a metal skewer and swirl around inside the tube to mix them together so that I have a workable paint. So it's not ideal. I'm sure there are better versions out there, but I do like the colours, and that little bit of mixing doesn't put me off using them. And the final touches where those highlights have been brought to life were really worth the effort of pulling out a slightly temperamental art supply. I think the sketchbook may be the never-ending sketchbook, as I've been working on it for so long and there's still so many empty pages left to fill. But I really like having something that I pick up and put down and can actually measure my progress, or just simply in a less judgmental way, see the journey of my art as it started so long ago. I've undoubtedly changed with time, and the way that I create faces on paper is not how I did back in 2020 when I first picked up this sketchbook. I guess the point of this is finding the process that you find enjoyable or valuable in some other way. For me, practicing with no need to sell my work or to make it into a thing other than a sketch in a sketchbook is the whole point of this. It's my relaxation, it's my indulgent creative space, and I simply can't imagine life without it at this point. I think that's all I have to say today. My inner monologue has ran on long enough. I hope you enjoyed watching this painting and listening to me waffle on endlessly. If you did, let me know in the comments, and I hope to see you again in another video soon. Bye.